So sound designing isn't necessarily, going into a field, with a field recorder
Right.
in the middle. And
I mean, sound design is like tweaking a filter, turning on a Moog, super basic subtractive synth. Sound design is pulling some knobs on it and seeing what happens. It doesn't have to be this chin stroking, blah, blah, blah. Yes, FFT transforms and
Yes.
It can be that if you want it to be, but I don't think that's most of its purpose in the application of music.
What is happening, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of the 52Qs podcast, a weekly podcast dedicated to all things production and library music, where we talk about industry topics and take deep dives into the different aspects of being a working production music composer. My name is Dave Croft, and I'm a professional composer and educator with placements ranging from the NFL to Food Network, and I've spent the last 22 years teaching music to career-minded creators just like you. So if this is your first time here, welcome. This episode is made possible thanks to the support of the family, friends, and patron subscribers of 52Qs who help keep the podcast and everything running. We are 100% community supported, so if you like what I do here, don't thank me, thank them. But if you want to learn more about how you can help support 52Qs while also unlocking exclusive subscriber perks like live streams, workshops, coaching sessions, and a ton more, then be sure to click on the links in the description for more information. One of the benefits of doing this podcast and having a YouTube channel is I frequently get the opportunity to chat with people who I really look up to and YouTubers who I follow and I watch religiously. So I was more than excited to recently sit down with Cameron Gorham of Venus Theory, and we chatted everything from the sense of exploration, how is AI, doing in our space, what about sound design, how can we get into sound design, and kind of what was going on with all that YouTube business a few weeks ago. So here is my recent interview with Venus Theory. If there was a YouTuber, I'll say, if that's not too much of a dirty word right now, if there was a YouTuber Hall of Fame for composers, sound designers, audio professionals, or a Mount Rushmore of YouTubers, this guy would be on it. And I am honored to have Cameron Gorham, aka Venus Theory, joining me on the podcast today. Cameron, I almost called you Cam because I go by Dave. Anyway, because we're tight like that, buddy. Cameron, how are you doing, my man?
All right. Just tired as usual.
Yeah, dude, you burn the candles on both. You've got so many irons in the fire.
Yeah.
How do you manage all that? And plus a family and a insane coffee habit. I mean,
Right.
How do you balance all that?
About 12 notebooks and 40 different, note-taking programs for the most part. And my Google Calendar, which just runs my life at this point.
Yeah. Well, speaking of, what note app or project management app are you fond of these days?
Millinote is the one I use for 90% of everything, just because it's designed for creative applications.
Okay.
So the whole interface just amalgamates all the, notes and checklist or files or links to videos or websites or whatever. So you can have a project board that has all of your stuff on it all at the same time, which just being more of a visual person, I think is pretty helpful. And then for road mapping things or whatever I might be doing. So it's really useful for video production, all my YouTube video stuff. I script it and do all the production notes in Millinote. I storyboard it in Millinote, all that. And then for client projects, all that lives there. Cause then if they send me a PDF of a manual or sound specs I need to follow, I can have that there and have a note list, a checklist, a link to a Google Sheets thing, so that's really useful because it just does everything at the same time.
Yeah,
and
I'll
it's
definitely
$20 a month, I think, for the paid version, but the free version gives you 100 elements or whatever they call it.
Okay.
So even the free version is great, but I had to buy the paid version because I have 8 million things to do at any given moment.
Yeah, because I'm always on the lookout for project management because, like you, I have a lot of little irons in the fire, whether it's teaching, whether it's, having students who live in Mumbai or Tokyo, or working on sample packs or running a community and doing YouTube videos and all of that. So I definitely understand.
I think that's the thing, is finding the
balance.
application that works as the best second brain.
Yeah.
Because otherwise, it gets way too complicated. I used to organize things in like Google Drive or the Google Keep, but then I had 5 separate applications I was using where, none of them worked together, and one was only for checklists, one was only for file storage. So that's what's nice about Millinode, is it just handles everything in one interface, or I can link to other things but still visually reference that, like, this is where all this stuff lives or whatever.
Gotcha. Yeah, I'm going to make a note of that. That might be my homework for this weekend.
It goes hard.
Yeah. And, the quality of your videos and the breadth of everything that you do, is it just you, or do you have some help? Like I have Mrs. 52Qs, my wife Shannon, she helps out. Do you have anybody else kind of, on the sidelines or behind the camera who's helping you lift this enormous thing?
My wife works with me. She handles most of the administrative stuff now. As of just a couple months ago, she started working with me. So she does, the invoicing and the email meetings and the organizing and the scheduling, especially just kind of the other littler things that just tended to eat up so much of my time. Because that was the thing, is it was just getting so busy to where it wasn't sustainable to do as just one person, because a lot of the projects I work on, especially nowadays, are significantly more involved. Whether it's a YouTube video or like the client projects I work on, get bigger and bigger. So after a certain point, it's way harder to handle all that yourself. So my wife helps out with a lot of that, but with videos and stuff, I do all the writing, all the editing, all the coloring, all the music, all the whatever. And then, sound design, whatever, I do all that myself. So my wife sort of acts as my liaison and in-between person, which is nice too, because especially as the YouTube channel grows, it's nice to have that one extra step of insulation of people like harassing me from my inbox to review some like LED coffee mug or something stupid.
Right. Or come on to my YouTube channel and join me on an interview. Right?
Yeah. And there's some crazy people out there. That's the weird part of YouTube.
Yeah, well,
and wacky people.
Yeah, I've gotten a handful. I mean, we're relatively small compared to the reach that you have. But tell us a little bit about it. And I want to get into the YouTube stuff. A few weeks ago, we over here on the channel, I asked the question, do you need a YouTube channel? Do media composers need a YouTube channel? I think the final takeaway was, you need a channel, but you don't necessarily need to be a YouTuber, right? Even though half of my video was about being a YouTuber. But, you don't need to be a YouTuber. Tell us about that part, because that's such a big aspect of your footprint in the industry.
Yeah. And I think it's a big thing that's helped me a lot. And I used to think of YouTube as like half of a portfolio in a way, and it's a portfolio with a new presentation, because if you build a Squarespace website or whatever, and you put your portfolio on it, I'm sure it looks great, but no one's really actively seeking that out. And I think that was one of the things that really helped me, was by just doing YouTube videos and whatever, brands would find my channel and, oh, he's really good at this. And, or he used this plugin, or, oh, we make that plugin, we should hire him to do presets for it. So I think it's a good way just to extend your reach by utilizing the tools that are available to you. So I think, back in the 90s, that was like magazines and, like getting featured in Guitar World or something would be a way bigger deal 20 years ago than it would be now, where now if you post a Sweet Home Alabama cover on TikTok, Sony's going to come knocking at your door. So I think as much as, as you mentioned, YouTuber is a dirty word, kind of as we mentioned, prior to starting this, it's that new paradigm of everything just becomes content, which is definitely a double-edged sword. And I think that's a big part of why I've shifted my own content and like what it is and what it's about and how I approach it and how I'm sort of continuing to evolve away from what I was originally doing, both because like my heart just isn't really in that place anymore, but it's also a matter of just like separating the two things. My YouTube channel, my video process is just a creative outlet, and it's not the impetus for everything else I'm doing, which it gets hard, especially on music YouTube. And I'm sure people that because a lot of people look at my channel and go, oh, he's a full-time YouTuber, which I'm not. I am a professional musician and sound designer, like that is my day job, which is awesome. And I love that, obviously, as you can see by the piles of garbage sitting behind me. But, it's hard to do that and put the same amount of love into it when you're having to kind of peel back the curtain constantly. And I think it's not that entertaining because then the nature of the work becomes performative. And I don't think that's what a lot of it is about. So it's a very dangerous line to walk. But I think if you do it well, it can be hugely helpful rather than just spamming people's emails of, hi, I make really great music. It's the, I don't know, idiom of like show, don't tell, right?
Yeah. And boy, do I understand. Like I said, this channel is relatively small. We stay really, really niched and focused, but I can feel the beginnings of that.
Right.
When you were, had, 1,000, 3,000, 5,000 subscribers, was there like a moment where it's like, oh, wow, this is becoming like a thing or a real thing that is going to start getting attention? And did you find yourself having to kind of shift as a musician and a composer? Like, were you chasing algorithms and doing all of that business?
Not really so much then as more lately as I get more into just doing YouTube more seriously just because I enjoy it and I enjoy the video process. But early on, yeah, when you get those first couple hundred subscribers, you're just like, oh, sick. It's like when you upload like SoundCloud's kind of dead-ish now, but like when you uploaded a song to SoundCloud and you got 100 plays, like, oh, holy shit, 100 people listen to my song. That's awesome.
Right.
And then you get like 1,000 plays and then you get 10,000 and so on. I think it was maybe around that time where it hit somewhere between 10 and 20,000 where the videos were just getting more and more views. Because when I started, it's when anybody starts something, 100 people watch the video and that's really exciting, but very, very small fish in a very large pond. So then once I was receiving more in the range of, a couple thousand views for every video, and I, had built up this subscriber base where I knew that the second I dropped a video, it was going to get, sustainably a couple thousand views.
Right.
That was where it kind of started clicking that, something is going on and there is an audience for what I'm doing.
Yeah.
And at the same time, that was when I noticed, companies and brands came knocking at the old inbox to do a sample pack or work on a sound bank or do a video on our plugin. And that's super exciting at first. You get a free plugin that you really wanted. That's super, super cool. And then you get a little bit bigger and you can, hit 30, 40,000 subs. Then you can reach out to brands. Hi, I like your things. Can I have one? And they're, sure, that's a great deal. We get free content on our stuff and I get a free thing. And that's super exciting because Senpai noticed me. And yeah, that's where it really does start to shift into just becoming its own beast. And that's hard because then it does become just a job in its own right. And it does sap into your creative work.
Yeah.
Which is super hard to do. And I think that's anything, right? Like,
yeah,
when I was a teenager, I wanted to be a musician and, wanted to be a big rock star and whatever. And it takes, and I think everybody knows that, like, it takes a very specific type of person to do music professionally.
Yeah. Well,
like,
it's
as
a
job
with any creative art. If you want to
right.
write comic books, or if you want to be a painter or a sculptor, as soon as you start doing it for money consistently, then
the whole
shine,
game changes.
Then it starts becoming business.
Yeah.
And to that point, as of this recording, just last week or earlier this week, you found yourself kind of in the YouTube meat grinder, having been demonetized and things were pulled down. And I just want to say, I super appreciated your transparency and authenticity. I think it's one of the reasons. I don't know, when people tune into a Venus Theory episode, they know they're not going to get any BS, right? But walk us through that process and what that means, like going into the future. Not that you're committing to anything, but it was really fascinating getting a kind of a front row seat
Yeah, where I just pulled the whole mask off and was like, all right, let's do it.
Because this
Welcome
is,
to the news.
Yeah, if you're talking about like tens of thousands of subscribers and views, I mean, this is not an insignificant amount of money.
Well, and that was the thing too, is it hit a point where my channel was getting pretty regularly, in the range of like 100,000 views per video, which is really where I wanted to be. Mm-hmm. And then that happened where it just, got flagged because a robot saw something. Originally, I thought it was the Waffle House clips. Mm-hmm. Turns out it wasn't that. It was a clip from a music video I used from Bella Porch, where there's like these heads on a conveyor belt, but not in a violent way. Like, it's not gory. It's representative that the characters are robots being assembled in this factory. So that got flagged as gratuitous extreme violence for no reason. And of course, that video is also fully monetized, and that was fine when they did it, but God forbid I show that. And like, it was a joke. It's just a quick gag in the video, but that's enough to get the whole kingdom torn down, which is super frustrating, knowing how hard I work on these videos, especially. And that was a big part too, is then that happens, I get demonetized, I don't know what's going on, and no one at YouTube can really tell you anything. So I reached out to the chat, and I did all the proper avenues of, hello, I am having a problem, please help. And I'm like 98% certain I was just talking to like Bard, Google's AI. Right. I don't think they're real people in the YouTube chat anymore. Yep. It ended up going to Twitter. A bunch of people started tagging YouTube after I angry tweeted, and a couple of people tagged the creator liaison, which just infuriated me to know that there is one human being on this planet who can apparently do anything about this. So that was just a disaster.
And they can only be reached through social media.
Right. Yeah. And it was just because I made this big stink about it. If I was a brand new creator where my third video that had this, like, no one's going to do anything. I think the only reason it happened is because I just happened to have enough of a platform where people started freaking out for me on my behalf. Yeah. Which is just frustrating. So that sucks, but whatever. And it ended up getting resolved. They remonetized it. They took off the age restriction, so that was fine. But then after that, the next couple videos just flopped super hard. Like, my last two videos have performed so poorly, but it's one of those things where as a creator, you want to blame the platform, you want to blame the algorithm, but I think it's just, maybe they were bad subjects for videos. They're just not that interesting.
Yeah, and it's to the point that we made in the YouTube video a few weeks ago was, ultimately we're kind of digitally sharecropping here, and we are at the mercy of whatever that algorithm is, which is why, pointing folks to your Patreon, pointing folks to your ways that you can support. Like, if you are a fan of you, Cameron, and if you're watching this and you're like, yep, I like the cut of that guy's jib, right? Then there are ways to support him other than, watching YouTube ads.
Yeah. And that's the frustrating thing, is then I immediately started thinking, oh, what if I just went ad free on the channel? So I have a second channel that's just kind of my test dump that, I just use for testing things mostly. Sure. Yeah. And I threw up a video on there, and then I threw up another video, one with monetization turned on and one with it completely turned off, because I was like, oh, if I just go fully Patreon, I'll disable all ads on my channel, because that is the biggest proverbial middle finger I can raise to YouTube is here is terabytes worth of video content that I'm going to put on there and not give you a cut of, because they take 45% or whatever it is. Yeah. But as soon as I put out the video, one monetized, one without, the one that was not monetized was dead in the water right out the gate, which makes sense. It's in YouTube's interest to display ads. Right. So that sucks, because now you're stuck kind of playing the game. But I think that's ultimately the creator equation with things like YouTube and Twitch and so on, is just, the castle's only as strong as its walls, so to speak. So if you can have Patreon, or you can have sample packs, or have a career outside of it, then that's the way to do it, which I'm very fortunate in that YouTube is not my sole thing. It still is just a very glorified and expensive hobby at this point.
Right. That brings in a little of that cheddar, but, not,
well, and
not
that's the thing,
so
is like
much.
AdSense is a joke anyway. So
yeah.
But it's the principle of the thing, damn it.
Yeah. And speaking of like sample packs, let's talk about some of the other things that you have going, other than, the Patreon, where they can absolutely support you. One of the things that I know that you do is you make sampler instruments. Yeah. Was that just an extension of you as a tinkerer, and a tweaker, or tell us about your journey into making your sample instruments?
Yeah, I mean, early on, I got into sound design and playing with synths, and experimenting with different microphones and doing weird time stretching and whatever. Eventually, I got into stuff like Reactor and Contact, a decade or more ago at this point, and that started to get more interesting, learning how to build crude Contact instruments, learning how to design a synthesizer in Reactor from like a visual DSP standpoint. So that was interesting, and it's always been something I've enjoyed doing. And I just think it's helpful to retain more of your own sound, so to speak, where, I would sample out different instruments or things, or just do a bunch of field recording and throw those random Foley recordings into Contact and, mess with the effects and stuff just to build something interesting. So it's always been a thing that I do. It just eventually turned into like, oh, I could probably make money doing this. Like, people have careers as Contact developers and such. So that was when eventually I got more, and a lot of this was through to the YouTube channel for the most part, of getting more into doing sample packs and loop kits and things like that, got put on Loop Masters and Splice and and then did some work with a couple companies as a contractor doing Contact instrument development and sound development for Contact instruments and things like that. And eventually it just got to the point now where I can do my own decent sampler instruments and things like that. Because I originally was wanting to do Contact instruments, but then David Hillowitz gifted us all with decent samplers. So I didn't have to get chained into the Contact realm, which is fine for me because I hate programming in Contact anyway. KSP drives me insane. So yeah, the decent sampler stuff's been really nice to do as well, because it's easier to develop for. It's free, it's accessible, it's very lightweight. So that's a fun way to develop instruments that I have an idea for, something like that. And
and David is also a working composer. Not that whoever originally made Contact wasn't a composer, but it has evolved such that it's kind of designed by boardroom, by committee.
Pretty much, yeah.
But David is like, I need this. I need a sampler to be able to do this, so I'm going to make one and then distribute it for free. And
I think that's really the beauty of it, is it just opens up the platform for everybody. It makes development easier, and it makes getting a hold of these things easier if you're a musician who just wants to use the sounds. And I think that's a big part of my own libraries, is just designing libraries that I use anyway for my own composition work and music and such, but then fleshing them out a little bit more to package them as like a commercial sampler instrument release. And then, on top of that, doing the sample packs and loops and things like that. But I've gotten more and more away from that at this point, just because, it's extremely competitive. It's extremely annoying. The pay is worse and worse and worse every year. And then now we've got a lot of those like AI sample generation tools. And, I don't see that being too much of a job in the next 5 years anyway.
Yeah. Oh, so many different ways we could go with that. Because I definitely want to talk about AI, and I want to talk about, commercial viability. But, so many of the folks that watch this channel and other channels like yours, they are looking to break out of, hobby territory and into being able to make some money. I don't think anybody is like thinking in a year I can go full time as a production music composer or whatever.
Yeah, but, hate to break it to you, but if you're looking to make a full-time living off music alone.
Well, I don't know of any composer who is just like waking up, going into the studio, writing for 8 hours a day, 5 days a week, and they're teaching or they're doing samples or
like Chris Lord-Alge and stuff. Like they make media appearances, and Hans Zimmer does other stuff. Hans Zimmer collaborates with sample companies and stuff. Like I know very, very, very few full-time musicians where that is the sole thing they do. And of the people I do know that do that, they're just as broke as they were when they were 20. But now they're like, 35 with 3 kids, which is not fun.
With mortgages and kids. And I have a friend of mine who is a guitarist. He's older. He's in his 60s. And here in Orlando. He moved in the 80s to Orlando to work at the parks, and he worked at Disney for 30 years, 40, like full time. This is what I did. But especially COVID has completely just destroyed the live performance aspect.
Oh, yeah.
Orlando has a pretty big theater scene, and more theaters are choosing, to use backing tracks over it. And that's that same mentality.
Well, that was most of what happened with the music side as well. Was the booking agencies folded because the venues were closed. The venues folded because the venues had to stay closed for so long and whatever. And then the bands that had agents no longer have a way to book, and the venues they used to play are gone. And now they have nothing to do. And right. of the few slots remaining, it is infinitely more competitive, and there is no money in it.
And it's infinitely easier. I mean, 15 years ago, how would you release a CD? You'd go to CD Baby, or you'd print something up. But now it's like you pay your $19 a year to DistroKid, and you can back a dump truck of anything you make in your DAW up to Spotify. And so it's never been easier, but it's also never been more crowded. So when you're wanting to get into either streams off Spotify, YouTube, or YouTube views, or even like to cut it as a splice sample maker. I mean, because I feel like you watch a couple of videos on YouTube about making splice samples, and then you'll see how many people are out there like, you can make it as a splice sample.
Well, and then, the YouTube danger is, I feel like probably a good 80 to 90% of music YouTubers have no idea what they're talking about, because very few of them actually actively work in the music industry, which is always really funny.
I have.
Which is a huge gripe I have with a lot of it, but and that's a big part of why I started making my own exit from that space, because I'm just over it. But yeah, like when it comes to alternative revenue sources, and I'm obviously speaking from the standpoint of a very different set of experiences. Obviously, in my case, YouTube was super helpful, but yeah, getting into sample making and stuff like that can be a great little revenue source. Sample instruments, I find, can bring in more revenue just because the barrier to entry to do that is a lot higher. It's not necessarily difficult, but anyone can make a drum kit pack. It's really not rocket science, but to develop an interesting sampled instrument, that's a little harder to do. It's a little more specialized. It's a little more unique. And, I think people are willing to pay for something like that more so than another lo-fi chords pack, when most of those are like free anyway.
Yeah. Or just pencil them in, man.
Obviously there's stuff like composing, library music, things like that can be good to get into. But I think the biggest thing, in my case, YouTube just helped me get that reach to be able to sustain things. The biggest thing is building up as many other revenue sources as you can. But I think the real key to it is doing it in a way where you remove as many middlemen as possible. And I've worked with like every company under the sun at this point, probably, but that's the other part of it is when you work with companies, especially when you're just getting started, they take their 30% and so on. But if you do a YouTube channel or a TikTok or an Instagram or whatever, if you use these platforms to leverage your own image and brand, then you can just sell it yourself. And that makes a very big difference in the paycheck at the end of the month to just do your own thing.
100%. I mean, that's really why I have a YouTube channel, is I enjoy teaching, and it's to point people to the community. That's free. You can join the 52 Qs community for free, but there are subscription tiers and workshops and lessons and coaching. But the YouTube channel is just a small part of a much larger picture.
Yeah. And I think that's pretty much anyone that does this kind of stuff. Everybody I know who works in the music industry does 100 different things. Some of them not even necessarily music, but tangentially related to it. I do like guest lectures at colleges sometimes. I do consulting with companies on, like product design and other things like that are in the music industry, but it's not just sitting here like, plunking on my keyboard all day, which I think that's the vision we all get in our head is I'm just going to wake up and make music all day, every day. Yeah, and that is probably the least part of the job. It's a big part of the job for sure, but in the grand scheme of things, the actual making of the music is the little foundation that everything grows from.
Yeah. I could not agree more. And if you're watching this and you're, looking at different YouTubers and everything, I'll just say, just check the credits, just
going to
research
someone's
your folks.
website is a very easy way to just legitimize someone.
If somebody's selling you a course or a package or whatever, just do your research. That's all I'll say.
And I think the big thing with that too is also basic logic dictates, and like kind of quoting Super Eye Patch Wolf's video here, but when you look especially at the people selling the courses or things like that, because most of them are just garbage, but is this something they could replicate is the question you have to ask. Where if I was going to sell a course on how to grow a big YouTube channel, I could. Do not buy that course though, because if I had to start over today and make a new YouTube channel, I don't think I could. I would have a better idea of how to get started, but I do not know for a fact that I have a formula that would work.
Right.
I could try really hard, but and that's like when you see people, how to become a big Twitch streamer. And it's like, here is a set of circumstances that applied one time 10 years ago.
Right.
That may or may not even be relevant or accurate for you. But yeah, with the courses especially, you have to be careful with that, where if I did a course on how to be a sound designer, I have the credits and stuff to sort of prove that like I can teach you this, and this is something I have been doing. And that is something that I feel I could teach someone to do, because if I started over today, I could do all these things again and still have a career in it. Whether or not it's a full-time thing is a very different story, but that's any creative field. Like I could teach you to make money as a sound designer, but if someone is promising you, quit your day job in 4 weeks and become a full-time MIDI pack creator.
Yeah. No, and it's the worst for me because I study novel writing and book writing. It's like I'm a best-selling author, and learn how to become a best-selling author by my book. But they're a best-selling author in books on becoming best-selling authors.
Right.
That's a real disconnect. And so that's all I'll say. Just do your research, do your homework, invest in people, whether it's buying their courses or whatever, who are already doing the thing that you want to do, not who just know how to tell you to do the thing that you want.
And I think that's the big thing, especially in the age of social media and whatever, is we've entered this sort of grifting era. And I think that's really harmful to a lot of creative communities, because especially in the social media space, especially on YouTube and Instagram for some reason. I don't know why it's so popular on Instagram, but just a lot of people hawking garbage, how to become a full-time food blogger and and sign up for this to 10x your insert desirable
some
thing
of those
here.
Like write a nonfiction book about something you know nothing about.
Right.
I mean, literally, like just go Google it. And now with ChatGPT and AI and everything, oh my gosh. Speaking of AI, it is the 800-pound robot gorilla in the room. I'm not sure if are we overreacting, or is this really the Indiana Jones boulder just slowly rolling to squash
Well, it's
us?
funny because AI has gotten to the point as well where when we thought of automation, especially in the industrial age, it became that menial tasks were assigned to robots.
Right.
Building the car and fabricating the metal was done by robots because it was better for a human to have a higher level role to look at, is this functional? Is this doing things the way it's supposed to? How could we be more efficient and so on? And I think that age of automation increased into like the McDonald's example, where if you go into a McDonald's now, or most of them at least, a lot more of them now, I've seen these everywhere, the kiosk.
Yep, there's one or two
one or two
registers.
people actually at the thing. Most of the time they're actually in the back, but there's maybe one person just on the register at all times, but you can tell they don't want to be bothered. They want you to go to the damn
And you
kiosk.
feel like you're inconveniencing them.
Right, yeah. You feel bad going up and be like, can I have my chicken nuggets?
I'm sorry, I'm making you do your job.
So I think that was, in a weird way, that was the idealized future where, truckers, for example, that's the big one with the self-driving cars. Truckers are now being targeted for automated self-driving vehicles, but in the end, it becomes more profitable and I guess, maybe more fulfilling. I don't really know, without getting into the philosophical aspects of work. You are now the person that repairs the thing.
Yeah.
You go from being the person who hits the nail with the hammer all day to the person who repairs the robot that does that.
Right.
You go from the fabricator to the person who programs the CNC machines. But now in the creative industry, it's a weird Pandora's box, because we had this future where the robots do all the dumb things we don't want to do, and we're left in this utopian society where we just get to be romantics and artists, and
this
but then all of a sudden we're seeing really good art coming out of Mid-Journey. We're like, oh shit. And I think the music space, we see that too, where it's like, AI is making music, and some of them suck. Some of the tools are getting pretty good. And I'm sure
it's been less than a year,
even ChatGPT, I was working on something I didn't understand, and I just said, hey, could you write some Lua code to do this? And there it was. Dude, and I was like, wow, that's incredible. And
for my OBS CSS, right. I was like, I need to change the font, and I don't know enough about CSS. And so can you do this? So I just change the font to
Poppins. And I've used it to like debug code and stuff too. And it's really good at that. And I've used it with some of my YouTube ideas, where when I structure a video, I have like bullet point structures I'll start with before I start like writing the actual thing. And I might throw that into GPT and say, what is the order of events here that makes the most sense for this information? And, what are questions that a video with this title would raise?
That's right.
So I can make sure I'm considering things and using it as a tool to retain creative objectivity, which is very valuable. And as someone who can't really draw, I got all the musical talent. My dad got the drawing talent, which is really dumb.
Together, you could be your own Disney.
Right. Yeah. So, my dad can draw incredibly well, but I can't draw to save my life. So having something like Stable Diffusion, really handy for me to then, I can visualize something, but I can't do that.
Yeah.
So I could tell Stable Diffusion, hey, I made a sample pack called Robot Growls Vomit Step. Make a picture of a robot throwing up green goo at an EDM festival.
Right, with bolts and
right,
nails
yeah,
in
and it just spits out 400 images, and 3 or 4 of them are pretty good, and one of them looks nice, so I have it variate that, and next thing you know, I've got my cover art rendered in 7,000 by 7,000 pixels, and it looks amazing, and it's custom designed for me, trained on a data set, granted, but that's something that to me is really useful as a creator. And I think that is maybe where a lot of the future, at least in the immediate future, the use and the threat of AI lies. It's in that those who leverage it gain some of these creative superpowers. Those who fear it probably need to look a little more inward. I'm not overly concerned that an AI robot is going to take my music away from me. In 10 years, it might be really good at making Venus Theory music, but I still get really fulfilled making music. Yeah. I don't care if robots do it too. I just, I'm a musician who enjoys the process of writing music. What a concept. And I think that's the thing we forget. It's easy to get scared, and it's easy to say then like, it's going to take my job away from me. And that's not what took your job away from you. Piracy, record labels, endless middlemen, and the age of internet accessibility took your job from you.
Yeah, streaming royalties, that's what's taking your job away from you right now. It's why, as of this recording, the writers and the actors are on strike.
Right, and I don't think AI is the biggest threat. It's just one of the many things screwing things up, and it's, as an artist, you just have to love the process.
Yeah, and I've said that here on the show, you have to love composing more than you love having composed.
Right, and if I deleted my YouTube channel today, and I sold all my gear and got rid of my studio, in a week, I will go out and buy a guitar or a piano or something and just get right back to it. Because I just really love making music and stuff.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I think that's the hard part. And I think maybe that's what separates the career creatives from the hobby ones, is just, and not even really the hobby ones, but the people who really do take that step into leaning into it as a profession, is just, there's something in you that you have to create or you're going to explode.
Well, that's the sustainability. You know, you can't sustain a 20, 30, or 40-year career, which is, that's hopefully that's the haul we're in for. And
Right.
you can't sustain a career like that if you don't enjoy if you don't enjoy holding an instrument or penciling in MIDI notes, or if you don't enjoy tweaking synths. And I'm not saying you have to do all those things, but
Right.
if the process isn't a reward in and of itself, then you're on borrowed time.
Right. Well, yeah. If the process is a mean to an ends for validation, especially external validation, then what are you doing?
Well, it's imposter syndrome and resistance and procrastination and all that stuff. And I think we all deal with that on some level, especially once you start getting successful in something and you're like, oh, hey, yeah, I'll make a bunch of those. I had to write 45 dramedy cues for Discovery Channel. And by the 35th, I was like, oh my God, I'm over this. But
and I think that's the thing that's where AI is going to go. And that's why I see library music probably taking a backseat, other than very bespoke music. But I think that's the creative future.
Yeah.
Because I'm an independent filmmaker or something. Like I'm working on like a short film, I guess I'll call it right now. So I'm working on this little short film project. And if I was looking at that as someone who just didn't know anything about music, right? Like I can't draw, so I use AI to help me draw.
Yep.
Whatever. If I was working on this short film and I just needed generic piano, bum, 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 and like little strings, something where it's just the most generic stuff, then why would I not use AI to do that? But if I had a very specific creative vision, I think it is just in the nature of human collaboration where that's going to be sought out specifically based on the artist's merit.
Yeah.
Whereas if I'm an app developer and I just need, because I wrote a lot of music for apps in the last couple of years, which is a weird industry, but so much of it is just, hey, can you do kalimbas and some like bongos, where you're just making like Donkey Kong,
right.
and little like, and then the water level,
right.
That stuff's going to be taken over by AI. I'm not heartbroken about it. It's work. But it was
the lowest hanging fruit,
right?
It wasn't paying a lot, and to your point about using album art, I've used DALL-E to do some album art, and I was either going to use like a stock picture, or I had no budget to pay somebody.
Right. Well, hardly any of us do half the time,
right? And so me using that, using DALL-E. What am I trying to say? Folks who are going to use AI generated music probably weren't going to pay a lot, if any, for the music to begin with.
Well, and same, like I don't feel I took a job away from an artist having AI make the cover for that, what was it, Canadian Wildfires, like the last track I just randomly dropped. I didn't take a job from an artist using that because I was not giving that job anyway.
Right.
And if I was going to give that job, I would have just done it myself in Photoshop with stock photos and like some
100%
really, really crappy, mediocre digital painting. So it enables me as a creative to deliver a better product.
Right.
So I think it's a very empowering thing. And the people that are like, worried that AI, everyone's going to be a producer. Everyone is anyway. When sample packs, splice and stuff became mainstream, all you have to do is download a loop kit, slap it together, put it on DistroKid, and away it goes.
Yep.
If that is an existential threat to you as an artist, I don't think the blame there lies on that externalized thing. I think that's something you really have to examine of, why am I doing this then?
Yeah. And the more, talking about production and library music, the more publishers I talk to know that low hanging fruit's going to be gobbled up either by the royalty free folks and, Pond 5 and Audio Jungle. I mean, they're like
stuff like that.
Yeah. They're already like lowering the bar into AI space, but the publishers themselves are putting an increasingly higher premium on originality,
right?
On uniqueness, even though it has to, this episode of, Real Housewives of Miami still needs this little hip hop dramedy music.
Yeah.
How are you going to separate yourself? Which brings me to my next question, which is the element of sound design, recording, creating your own sounds. Somebody listening to this right now, maybe they're only a MIDI composer and they're all in the VST. What would you say to them, and how would you encourage them to kind of ease into that, or maybe let's say tiptoe into that space, considering
Of just like sound design and
in
stuff.
depth you've done sound design work?
I think the biggest challenge that's always a lot of fun is making a whole song using no presets. And, don't worry if it sounds like garbage. It probably will. It might not. It might be the best song you've ever made. But that's a good way to have to force yourself to understand the tools you're using. I think it's a lot like understanding music theory or mixing on a more technical level or things like that, where you just give yourself another color palette to work with, where most of the time when I'm composing, I use presets. Everybody does. A lot of the presets I use are now my own presets or whatever, but it enabled me earlier on to where when I would open a contact library or I would open Serum or whatever, and I would find a sound and I would say, that's pretty close, I'll go with that. Now, as you grow into that, it's helpful to then understand that's pretty close, but it needs this, or it needs less of that. Or what if it had this filter, or what if I put it through a reverb and things like that. And that's really powerful as a musician and artist to develop not only your own sound, but just open up the floodgates for more creative potential. What artist wouldn't want that?
Yeah. So sound designing isn't necessarily, going into a field, with a field recorder into the middle. And
I mean, sound design is like tweaking a filter, turning on a Moog, super basic subtractive synth. The sound design is pulling some knobs on it and seeing what happens. It doesn't have to be this chin stroking, blah, blah, blah. Yes, FFT transforms and yes, it can be that if you want it to be, but I don't think that's most of its purpose in the application of music.
Yeah.
It can be something you can get very creative and innovative with, especially in like the electronic scenes, a lot of film scores now too.
Absolutely.
I've noticed a tendency away from melodicism into texture, I guess, timbre.
Yeah, soundscapes, textures.
Yeah, and it's not
the
tonal,
line
it's not anything sometimes, but it is very interesting. And I think that's, in a really dumbed down way of saying it, it's that punk rock attitude of just like, okay, I'll just do stuff and do it myself.
Yeah, there's a fearlessness to it, and I think the line between music and sound design, it's no longer just, I'm going to make, strings and brass and my orchestra and this other person over here is making Foley and explosions and stuff. It's the line is so blurry. And especially if you want to get into games and apps, they're gonna want a sound person who can do music and sound design.
Yeah, right. And that's the thing I do, especially like some of the apps I worked on, or even one of the other gigs I'm working on right now. Being able to design, little clicks, things like that. Very useful skill to have, and that's the thing that makes you the person that gets the gig.
Yeah, and to be honest, it kind of scares me still. I remember I had the opportunity to do a game where it was penguins pushing ice cubes. Like it was like a match 3 game, but it was with penguins and ice cubes. And so the developer wanted me to do the music, but I could only do the music if I could also do the sound design. It was like a package deal, right? They only had the budget to pay like one dude. And
for just audio,
yeah, right, exactly. And the mix and the final master and all that business. And what broke me was he said, okay, we need sound design, so we're going to need all the little interface clicks and everything. I said, okay, I think I can get my brain around that. But what broke me was, okay, so the penguins are pushing 800-pound blocks of ice on a frozen lake, and I need you to make that sound. And I don't know where to start. I'm not going to go up to Iceland, and with my Zoom recorder.
And I think that's where sci-fi sound design is particularly fun, because then, what does a alien laser weapon sound like? There is no bar for that. But when someone says we need penguins pushing 800 pounds of ice, you're just like, oh,
is that a bowling ball on salt? I mean, that's how I would probably do it now. And I know we're getting into kind of Foley, but that was when I realized I've got to up my sound design game. Yep, absolutely.
And a lot of it is fun too, because even if it's not something you necessarily want to get into as a career, It's like mixing. Like one of the most helpful things for me with mixing, and I still do this to this day, is I'll just download stems from other genres that I don't even work, like a jazz trio or something. Just get stems for stuff like that and mix it, because it's something I don't do. It's something I'm not really involved in, but it forces me to get out of my own head and just purely listen to the mechanics of something. And I think that's where doing something like that that's more abstract is useful, because everything you do in those sessions can then be applied to your other sessions. Because when I'm mixing a, Cuban techno folk hop song or whatever, I find stems for, I'm hearing, oh, there's a clash at like 300 hertz, or, oh, the bass sounds weird, or, oh, the vocal kind of ducks here behind the horns, so maybe I should automate that. But then these are all things that I can bring into my own sessions and gain a deeper understanding for the inner workings of a track, and sort of see past the artistic vision into the more technical aspect and really elevate my own abilities. And I think that's the big thing with sound design and getting into the more abstract stuff is, all right, design the sound of a car engine starting, but it's a giant, Mad Max car, not just like Mom's Dodge Caravan. So what do? You might record Mom's Dodge Caravan because you have access to it, but what if you pitched it up? What if you pitched it down? What if you layered those? What if you rattled some cans around in your garage and compressed that with 12 OTTs? There's no rules on it.
Yeah.
But these are all things that when you come back and do a musical session, you might have a better understanding of compression and EQ and layering, and how to hear into the arrangement from more of a frequency perspective of, oh yeah, it kind of sounds hollow in like the low mid, so maybe I could do a brass instrument. Yeah.
And it's not like your brain compartmentalizes and says, nope, that's sound design. Like I practiced not video editing, but music editing to video. So taking my music, and trying to chop it up the way a video editor would for like a reality show or something like that.
And you have to use the really crude like NLE editing tools where you can't mix. You could just like cut.
Nope. I have a waveform and I'm trying to make it make sense. And you learn really fast how hard or how easy your own music is to cut apart and loop.
And it makes you a better arranger too, because then you can understand that, oh, if I have some more regular fade points, it's easier for an editor to do that, which in turn makes your music more licensable.
That's right. That's right. And that's us, bringing a skill outside of just music composition and it influencing and impacting. So, what are some of the tools? Like what is your, like, let's say Bambi legs, wading into the shallow end of sound design. What would you recommend for a complete noob?
Yeah, just getting into sound design, a synth, Vital or Odin or whatever, there's a bajillion free ones out there. Just a good all around blanket synth to play around with. Some kind of sampler, you don't really have to go full beans to get contact, but
probably your DAW sampler. I mean, they're
right.
all...
Yeah. Like Ableton has Simpler, FL has Slice X and stuff. Every DAW has some kind of a sampler. So some kind of sampler to play with, couple effects, and people like never believe this for some reason. I still don't understand it, but like your DAW's stock effects do everything you need. That's right. Guarantee it. Some external reverbs and stuff sound better, but 9 times out of 10, the stock stuff probably does the job. It's what is the saying? The plumber covered in shit blames his tools.
Right.
So it's just, if you just learn it and apply it, that's a lot more useful. So, a DAW, a synth, and a sampler. That's really all you need to get into sound design. I would always encourage people to get a good field recorder because it's a lot of fun. But even just using your cell phone, and they have the iPhone. I know there's what am I thinking?
There's like a mic. Shure makes a little mic.
And I think IK Multimedia now, and a couple of companies even do. It's like a proper audio interface that just plugs into your, and like, that's awesome.
I picked up one of these little guys. This is just a Zoom, H1N.
And even those things where it's just the little $200, $100, whatever field recorders.
It has a stereo mic. Great. I mean, I record my drums,
and that's the thing. They're way useful. And I've used cheap recorders in a pinch. I mean, I've used my cell phone to record stuff that ended up on Splice. Splice doesn't care. They just want good sounds, right? So a good field recorder is a good idea, but just a smartphone with a recorder app, really useful just to get out into the world and learn to understand active listening is a huge skill. There was
unpack that. What do you mean by active listening?
Was that? I want to say it was for DICE's Battlefield 2042. There was an interview with the composers, or the sound designer and the composer. Her name is Hildur something I can't pronounce because it's Icelandic. And it's got like a G with like a slash in it. I don't know what the hell that letter is. Phenomenal composer. Love her work. Can't say her name to save my life. But she talked about, in the process of composing Battlefield 2042, the idea of listening to different textures and ideas, because so much of the score for that was based on people bashing a dumpster or going onto a huge cargo ship and listening to how there's these creaks and moans. And I think that's the idea of active listening, is when you know, it's something you say with your friends or something, right? You walk into the mall. I'm dating myself here. People don't go to the mall anymore, but whatever. Pretend you're going to a mall and it's the 2000s and Hot Topic is still cool. And you walk in and the door goes like squeak and you're like, oh, that was funny. That's it. That is active listening. And field recording really makes you appreciate that. The crunch of leaves, the sound of throwing rocks on concrete, dropping a boulder into a lake, the sound of a car driving on gravel as versus asphalt, the sound of a drumstick against a tree or a friction mallet against a teacup. So it's really handy because it teaches you a lot about the physics of sound, the behavior of sound, the way that sound propagates and interacts, but also the idea that sound is the biggest liar, especially in the world of sound design. I think one of the common examples is for rain. Slight heavy rain is often the sound of frying bacon and things like that, or just frying things, because that, you hear the pitter patter of grease spattering. It sounds a lot like rain. So in your example of the penguins, that final sound from a sound designer's perspective could be anything. And I think that's why it's fun to watch Foley artists, especially. I have so much respect for where they're like,
I know.
Oh, here's this medieval knight walking, and it's like, Game of Thrones, some gajillion dollar thing. And like, it's this knight in armor walking down the castle, and then he fights a dragon or something. And the Foley artist is like giant industrial chains, a bunch of old coffee tins,
and
throwing boots
shoes
on sand and weird stuff like that. But then when you hear it against the picture, it's perfect.
Yeah.
I had one project I worked on. It was a puzzle game. And it was turn-based tiles of rocks, and they needed to be magical sounding, which I need to finish that project actually. But my first thought was, okay, I need rocks, right? If I'm making rocks that turn and lock into place, I'm going to go take some rocks in my hands, put them on my driveway or something and go, right? But that just sounds like nails on a chalkboard, mostly just like white noise, just and that doesn't sound like a rock going.
Right.
So what I ended up doing, swear to God, I went to my kitchen and we had a bunch of bananas, just a big old thing of bananas from the Walmart. So I grabbed the top of them, lifted it up and clapped them all together. And it was this really satisfying, like a deck of cards. And it's almost like that ASMR stuff that's so popular on YouTube, where it's an active listening sensory experience. And that's the thing, is active listening and field recording and just playing with things teaches you the nature of sound. So in this game, it's these octagonal tiles but that banana going really works well. So I did that 10 or 20 times, threw those recordings in the DAW, and then I layered some, I think I just took a big bag of like table salt and, kind of went like that just to get sort of a crunch layer. And then I think I took a couple rocks and just rolled them, clunk, 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 layered all that together. So 90% of the sound of rocks in that game is bananas, because the bananas sound more like rocks than rocks do.
Yeah. And you can't, like, once you can't kind of unhear it.
Right.
I did a track where I wanted a little ticking sound, but I wanted to use something kind of unusual. And so I have a basketball sitting over there, and I just hit a drumstick on the basketball, right? And if you don't know that's what it is, it's like, oh, that's cool. It's a little sound. Of course,
Right.
it didn't sound like bubbles, but once you hear, oh, that's a basketball. Yep. You're like, oh, hey, that's,
You can't unhear. And that's the hard part, is separating that process in your brain, because as the sound designer, as the creator, as the composer, as the artist, we know the means to the end, but the audience doesn't know, and they don't care.
it's like, can any sound designer not hear breaking bones and not think, oh, that's a celery?
Yeah, celery,
They
just
twisted
whatever,
celery.
like a green pepper getting crunched is someone's head getting squished. Yeah, and it's funny because it's so hard to separate that process of the appreciation of the aesthetics of the thing, of the work, of the whole, but that's a whole nother skill in and of itself, but I think that's something you only really get through experience.
Yeah. And that's true of any creative industry. If you're writing music for TV, you listen to music on TV differently. If you paint cars for a living, then you seek paint jobs on
when
cars.
My wife and I are in the car and some song comes on the radio and I'm like, oh, the vocals are really sibilant, or like, why is the kick drum like that? Or, my favorite is, oh, I had that pack, or like, I remember that pack, or, when I hear the Vengeance EDM sample packs that were so popular, because they're still super popular today, but there are certain loops and drums and stuff. I'm like, that's Vengeance House Volume 4. I know that kick drum. I have that kick drum.
Hearing Rise and Hit in the Avengers soundtrack,
everything.
I'm like,
Damage,
oh my gosh.
too always kills me, which is funny because I use Damage all the time, like Damage. And I need to get Damage too, but Damage is just such an incredible library. But then you listen to other games or like TV shows and you're like, that's Damage. I use that loop. I've used that loop before.
I'm not sponsored by Heaviosity, but Damage 2 is worth the price. It's really,
I need to get
good.
it. It looks really good. And and I've had Damage 1 forever. Like, but I think every composer person has Damage.
Especially when they bundled it with Complete. That's how I got it.
Right.
Like,
it's one of the best, just cinematic libraries for that kind of stuff. But that's the fun part, is you get something like Damage, which I believe Robert Dudzik, one of the sound designers, I love him to death. He's like if I could have a life-size cutout of Robert Dudzik in my studio, I absolutely would. I got to meet him once.
Not Spock, but that guy.
I got to meet him once at NAMM, and I just like completely fangirled over it. It was really funny. But watching him make some of the sounds that were put in Damage, so cool, because it's literally just banging on a dumpster, but you put that in Damage and you're like, damn, that's really good. With some compression, with some EQ, with a little bit of saturation.
And
that
their
sounds
punish
incredible.
Algorithm and all that.
Right. But now
so
I can go downstairs and close my bathroom door a couple times. But if I compress that, now I've got, and I've done a bunch of work doing sound design for like trailer houses for Hollywood effects libraries, kind of like Damage, but more industry only, sort of thing.
Bespoke stuff.
Right. Yeah. So I've done a ton of libraries for that kind of stuff. And those are really, really fun because you do just get this sort of carte blanche license of, we need impacts with a theme of action. We need impacts with a theme of magic, So I've done packs where and I'm about to go do another session of this next week, actually, going to like junkyards and just smashing things. Super fun. I've done packs where my washer and dryer were in them, where, you have this huge industrial clang, but you pitch it down, you filter it, you add a reverb, and you have this big, low cinematic, thing. And
now, I'm just asking selfishly, what recording rig do you guys have, like a Zoom F6 or something like that? Is that what you're rolling up there
right
with?
now I have the Tascam X8, which I really like, but my big gripe with it, which I wish Tascam would fix, and I don't know if this is something they could fix with the software update or not, but there's a really high-pitched whine when you record at 192 or anything. I think it's anything above 48K. If you record at 96 or 192, it has this really high-pitched whine when you pitch things down. In the recording as it is, you don't hear it, but when you pitch it down, there's this huge, super loud, just tinnitus-y, ring. That's super, super annoying. It's not hard to get rid of, but it is just annoying. But I love that one because it's 32-bit float recording.
Yeah.
Which at that point, gain staging basically doesn't matter. So that's really handy for doing sound design stuff, especially big, loud stuff, recording gunshots with that, especially, I will never go back to a 24-bit field recorder, because being able to record a gunshot, have it be clipped, and be able to save that, like, name your price.
Game changer. Yeah. That's the difference of taking, one take or having multiple takes.
Right.
And
Or getting home and being like, oh, I forgot to turn it down.
Yeah.
So I love the X8 because it's got a bunch of inputs. So I have that. I sometimes use the built-in mics if I need to be more discreet and don't want to look like a complete psycho. Because I've done things like that where I've gone into, Target or Walmart and recorded like little kids' toys, or
and with your boom and all that stuff.
Yeah, or going into like flea markets and recording typewriters and things where like I don't want to buy this. I just want to record a couple sounds off of it. So that's nice for more discreet recording, because it looks about the size of a cell phone, so people don't look at you like, oh, that dude's going to blow up a neighborhood.
Right. Or they're shooting a movie.
People are like, hey, what are you doing? What's up? But normally in my run and gun rig, I have these two microphones here. This is the HC15 and the other one is the HC25. I believe they're from Rycote. They normally make like wind protection gear and stuff, but they release these microphones. They're incredible. So I have the HC25 and the HC15. Normally I use the 25, which is a longer shotgun mic, extremely clean, super tight polar pattern. And then I have that on a Lewitt stereo bar. Mm-hmm. So in the center, I'll have the Rycote mic, and then off to the sides, I use the two Lewitt 040 matched pair small diaphragm condensers, or I have just other various microphones, like some SM57s, or I have like scientific measurement microphones I might use, or other odds and ends like that. But usually it's a 3 microphone setup. So I have the shotgun in the center. I stole this setup from Robert Dudzik, actually, but the shotgun in the center, just to give me a nice tight take of something. The side microphones, whatever they might be, just for a good stereo image, as well as just a different mix of the sound. I might want one version that's like a close shot and one that's more of a stereo, like ambience. So that's really handy. And having that 3 microphone setup is really useful, just to get, I could have 3 mics pointed directly out. I could have sort of an XY with a shotgun. I could have a super wide, like binaural setup with a shotgun in the center. It's a really, really handy way to do that. And, powering it off, I use just like a battery bank for like a phone I got on Amazon for, $5. And that'll power it all day. It's awesome. Wow. Yeah, but that's my usual field recording rig. And I have a day bag I take, which also has contact microphones, and I have an EMF microphone and just a couple other exotic things just in case.
Yeah. And if you're listening to this and you're like, wow, that sounds like a lot of gear I need to buy, you don't need to. You probably have one in your pocket right now.
Yeah.
Or like I said, go Marlon Gibbons turned me on to this guy, just a little field recording. The whole point is record something, get it into your DAW, start making it your own. Because if the AI overlords are coming for the low-hanging fruit, the generic fruit, then the only way that we are going to be able to survive, especially in the production and library music game, is standing out.
Yeah.
And we can do that by making unique sounds.
And I think that's been a huge thing for me, as the sound design works and whatever, and then trying to push music in other directions and whatever has been really nice, because that's definitely helped me survive the current AI apocalypse, volume 1 of, and I think a large part of that too is from my YouTube channel and being able to show more unique and bespoke ideas and whatnot. It makes me more attractive to hire as a composer.
Yeah.
As well as, and the reach notwithstanding, it's nice to have someone with name recognition.
Yeah, absolutely. I totally get that. Well, Cameron, I just so appreciate you. I feel like I could talk to you for about another hour, but I want to be respectful of your time.
Well, if we want to rapid fire some questions, I guess we could before we wrap up. Yeah, things here.
No, I'm feeling really, really good. I appreciate you, and as I said at the beginning, I appreciate your authenticity, your transparency. And as of this recording, I know it's been a bumpy couple of weeks. I'm glad to hear that the YouTube stuff is kind of ironing out for you.
Hopefully. Yeah, there's still some weirdness going on, but I'm kind of just taking a bit of a sabbatical from YouTube for a couple of weeks and then coming back to it with just some different projects. Because that's the thing, is trying not to blame the algorithm. I'm just going to blame myself and internalize that self-loathing and hatred into something better, I guess. That's the name of the game.
So if you want to follow Cameron, it's Venus Theory over at YouTube or venustheory.com. Go subscribe if you haven't. Why? What are you doing here? Just go subscribe. You will not be sorry. And if you appreciate, a nicely manicured beard, or I guess that would be is that a Van Dyke? Is that technically?
I think goatee. I don't know.
Versus whatever Grizzly Adams thing I got going on, and a fine appreciation of good coffee, then his videos do not.
And pretentious
disappoint.
Cinematography, lots of depth of field and whatnot.
Oh, I'm very jealous of your color grading. Even right now, like looking at this video, I'm just like, you look great.
It's a whole process. Yeah, A7 III and then vintage lenses is my main secret, and then just a ton of work color grading, which takes forever. Which is why my videos come out like once a month, because they just.
I don't have the energy, patience, or bandwidth to do that. And
dude, I barely have the energy, patience, and bandwidth to do it.
Yeah, I hear you, my friend. Well, Cameron, thank you so much. Really, really appreciate you being with us.
Yeah,
today.
Thanks for having me on.
Once again, a huge word of thanks to Cameron for joining me on today's episode. And as always, we're going to have links to our guests in the description, so be sure to click on all of that. Just go subscribe. I promise you will not regret it. But that is going to do it for us this week. And again, a huge word of thanks to all of the family, friends, and patron subscribers who really do make all of this possible. Please know that I love and appreciate every single one of you, and we'd love to have you join us. So whether you're a family, friend, or a patron, or if you just want to join the community, it is free to join. Head over to 52cues.com for more information. You do want to tune in next week, where I will be joined by members of the 52 Cues family, and we have our first roundtable discussion. We are going to be talking about subscriptions, the good, the bad, the ugly, the upside. Are there any upsides to software as a service? Well, I'm going to be joined by 52 Cues family members, and we're going to chat about it. So that is next week. So I hope you have had a good week. Again, thank you for joining me. And just know, friends, that I trust and believe that the universe has amazing plans just for you. Until next time, peace. The 52 Cues podcast is copyright 2023 818 Studios, all rights reserved. The music played on the podcast is copyright of their respective owners and is used with permission and for educational purposes only. For more information, including joining the community and submitting your cue for consideration on the podcast, head over to 52cues.com.